South Africans may breathe a sigh of relief soon, with talks of a possible fuel decrease on the cards for the month of October. However, this may exclude diesel users, of which the price might remain the same. We take an example from our closest inland neighbouring countries like Eswatini, who have already they've had fuel decreases at the end of this month, and can't help to wonder if we are possibly next, especially because Eswatini gets their fuel from South Africa and still manages to provide it to their citizens much cheaper. Let's find out what's going on. And with us, we've got the Automobile Association spokesperson, Layton Beard. Layton, good to have you. Thanks so much for being with us.
No, good to be with you, Leanne. Good to be on the show again.
So, okay, let's sort of get an update. Obviously, this is going to happen next week, Wednesday, or Tuesday, well, midnight. So next Wednesday, we'll see. What are we looking at for petrol and diesel, the adjustments? Obviously nothing final yet, but what are the predictions?
Yeah, I mean, the forecast is actually quite positive for petrol users. We're looking at a decrease of around R1.04. It's a little bit lower decrease than what we had expected mid-month, but not much. At mid-month, we forecast that we were looking at around R1.14, R1.20 decreases. It's about 10 cents less than that, but I think any decrease over R1 is still very significant. So petrol users, I think, will be very happy with this news. It's going to bring the cost of a litre down below 23 Rand again, which, for many people is very significant. We're not at the levels we were, obviously, in December, January. But I think, any decrease now is going to be good news, especially in the context of what else is happening in the country. The rolling blackouts, I think, is a very good example. It may just lift some people's moods, knowing that, while we do have these blackouts still continuing, the cost of fuel is going to be a little bit less, the cost of petrol. In the case of diesel, unfortunately, it looks like it's going to be increasing by around 8 to 13 cents, depending on what diesel you use. But that's not a massive increase. Look, it is still an increase, and it is still going to play into that manufacturing and agricultural and road freight sector, but it is less significant than what previous increases were. So I think all around a bit of a mixed picture. I think the most significant thing for us at the AA is that illuminating paraffin is likely to come down by around 60 cents. And I think for many, many millions of consumers in South Africa, that's where the real news story is, and that's very good news.
All right, so I want to dwell on diesel for a little bit, because this for me is sending red flags and a very worrisome picture, because yes, it may be a little bit of a less of an increase this time, but the month before was higher, the month before that was higher, and if I'm not mistaken, the month before that as well. It's constantly going up. Now, the problem is the price of diesel is something that hits all of us, whether we drive a diesel car or not. I mean, let's eliminate the car drivers from the equation. Let's talk about farmers. Let's talk about the truck drivers that we see on the road. And now, let's talk about generators, because everybody's powering their generators with diesel fuel, and this is becoming so expensive. Why the difference? Help us understand the difference between the two prices.
No, that's an excellent point you make. I mean, firstly, in terms of the difference in prices, we must understand that diesel and petrol are different fuels. And there's different refining processes that are involved in them. There's different processes in terms of, how they get to the consumer at the end of the day. And therein lies, a bit of an explanation in terms of why you're going to see a difference in the prices between those two. I'm certainly no expert on the chemical makeup of those, and somebody would probably give you a better explanation. But the simple explanation in layman's terms is that they are refined differently, they are different fuels, and therefore you're going to find a difference in those two prices. But you make the very good point, Leanne, about, when fuel prices are being discussed, we must always consider that it doesn't only impact on motorists and people that use public transport. Fuel prices impact on everybody, and it impacts on everybody on a daily basis. In the case of diesel, for instance, it's such a huge input cost in the manufacturing sector. In the agricultural sector, you mentioned farmers there. They use it to, for their industrial machinery. They use it to transport goods from the farm to the community, to the wholesalers. So it is a very important input cost. It's a very big input cost. And because of that, they will recover those input costs by putting their prices up. So when we see diesel prices increasing, especially on a consistent basis that we have seen over the last couple of months, it is going to filter into the economy. That loaf of bread you buy is going to be a little bit more expensive. Those eggs may be a bit more expensive. Even zero-rated foods that don't carry any VAT will become that little bit more expensive because the input costs have become more expensive. And then you've also got to consider the road freight that is used to deliver from wherever you are from the farm or from the wholesalers to the retailers. So it is going to be something that impacts on every single consumer, and that certainly is a worry. I think when we see the diesel prices rising over a consistent period, we do become concerned because it is going to impact at the end of the day on inflation, which we know is going to impact on consumers across the board.
Yeah, it really does. And I mean, you know, we also need to look at, we need to look at this talk about diesel. And Layton, I'm really putting you in a position where I fully understand if you don't understand, and if you cannot answer these questions, because, you know, some people speak to following the money trail, and we keep looking at the cost of diesel and the amount of money we are using to keep the lights on in the country, and diesel predominantly the source that's being used. And now we're hearing that there's a ship that is not able to, you know, to berth at the coast at Mossel Bay so that we can get that fuel to keep the lights on. Where are we getting our diesel from?
Look, we source the diesel from the same locations as all fuel. I mean, it's Mediterranean, it's places like Singapore, it's Malaysia. These are the types of Middle East is another. So these are the types of places that we are sourcing that fuel from. You know, in terms of the question that you're asking, Leanne, yes, I mean, I think a lot of people are pointing fingers and saying, you know, exactly where does the money go? How do we follow this money trail? I think from the AA's point of view, without getting into a political debate, because that's not what we're about at all. At the end of the day, we're only concerned about how these things impact on consumers. I think it just reinforces our call again of how our fuel pricing in South Africa is structured, how the components are put together. And we feel, and we've been saying this consistently, let's have a transparent process where we interrogate each of those elements in the fuel price, where as a collective with all the role players involved, we look at those components and say, are there any areas within that fuel price structure that we can cut some to mitigate against rising fuel costs? How do we deal better with fuel pricing going forward? And that for us is the real question. So we would like to see that happening. We know behind the scenes some things are moving. We know the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy has, for instance, called for people to make submissions on a price cap on 93 octane fuel. We don't know exactly where that process is. But for us, it's all about let's review the fuel price, let's review the elements of that fuel price, and let's see where there are places within that fuel price that we can deal better with those components in terms of mitigating these high fuel costs going forward.
Two very quick questions to you. I know we're running into time problems. In the introduction, I spoke of our neighboring countries, and a lot of these neighboring countries, they get fuel from us in South Africa, and they still manage to provide it for their citizens at a much cheaper price than what South Africans pay for fuel per litre. You spoke about the respective taxes that we add on to our fuel price, because that is essentially what's going on. But perhaps we need to address that. Why is fuel cheaper in Eswatini than here in South Africa if they actually get that from South Africa? Is it purely because of the taxes we pile onto the price of petrol?
Yes, it is absolutely that. I mean, in South Africa's case, we're looking at around R6.18 in taxes that is added to every litre of fuel. R3.94 goes to the general fuel levy, and we know that goes to the fiscus. And the general fuel levy, as we are all aware, is one of those taxes that's up for discussion every time the fuel price is being discussed. Many people saying, let's scrap it, let's do away with that. The AA's view is that if we were to scrap that fuel tax, you know, obviously you would shave around R4 off a cost of a litre of fuel, but government, in our view, would just simply look for other ways in which to get that tax. So that may not be the ideal situation. And then obviously you've got R2.18 that goes to the Road Accident Fund Levy, and that's to compensate victims of road crashes. And again, there, the AA's view is, why do we have this over-reliance on the RAF? And the reason for that is that we have such a poor road safety record in this country. Road safety isn't enough of a priority, and because it isn't enough of a priority, we have to make provision for people who are involved in crashes. instead of dealing with the problem at its root, and that is improving driver behavior in South Africa. So those two taxes are added on every litre of fuel, Leanne, and because of that, they're not added on those fuel costs in other countries, in our neighbouring countries that source their fuel from us. So if you were to take that R6.18 off every litre of fuel, that's what you would be paying in one of the neighbouring countries. How do we deal with those taxes? I think that's part of what the AA is saying needs to be part of that review going forward.
All right, Layton, thank you. Thanks so much for talking to us. Sorry, we've unfortunately come to the end of the interview. But maybe your crystal ball, the situation in Russia, Ukraine, again, going forward. I mean, people are really worried about the winter months. Is that going to affect, are we going to see it going up as well more?
It's a difficult question to answer, Leanne. You know, we have to look at those two factors that influence it. I think it's going to continue being a factor, certainly going forward. I think especially in Europe, it's going to be more of a factor at the moment than maybe for South Africa, but certainly in terms of supply, it will remain an issue for us as long as it remains an issue for other countries in the world.
AA spokesperson Layton Beard, thanks for talking to us. Great to have you on the program.